this year. Lindsay is hosting. We want something low-key. That was it. No greeting, no punctuation, no warmth. The message came from my mother, Diane Callahan, and it lit up my phone screen just as I was pulling a sheet of cranberry scones from the oven. The kitchen still smelled like orange zest and cinnamon. The window above the sink, the one Thomas had installed 2 winters before he passed, reflected my stunned expression in the fading afternoon light. I didn't cry. I didn't even blink. Instead, I turned off the oven, set the scones on the cooling rack, and stared at the message again slowly, as if it might change with time or softness. I reread it once more, then let the phone fall face down on the counter. For 20 years, I had hosted Christmas. My home, our cabin in Vermont, was the gathering place, the place of firelight and handmade stockings of roast duck and mulled wine of carols on the record player and snow tracked in on boots. After Thomas died, I kept the tradition going. Maybe I clung too hard. Maybe it became my armor. But now, my family was asking me not to come at all. Not because I had done something wrong, but because, as they always phrased it, you just go too far with things. My younger sister, Lindsay Callahan, had never hosted. She was 15 years my junior and currently engaged to a man named Connor Hayes, who I'd only met once. She lived in a sleek 2-bedroom condo in Boston with concrete walls, LED lighting, and a refrigerator that talked. It was modern, minimalist, quiet. She called it peaceful. I always thought it felt like a hotel you couldn't quite afford. I wiped my hands on the dish towel, red and green plaid frayed from years of use, and picked up the phone again. A second message had arrived. "Don't take it the wrong way," Marie Mom had followed up. "You know how intense you get about the holidays." Intense. They always used that word like it was an accusation. When I built out the old woodshed into a warm guest room, they said I was intense. When I made place cards with hand-pressed sprigs of rosemary, they called it intense. When I organized a 12-dish menu and made every pie crust from scratch, it wasn't devotion, it was too much. Never mind that they showed up year after year. Ate every bite, took leftovers home in foil, sat by the fire in the very house they now said was too far. I scrolled down and typed a reply. Understood. Enjoy your peace. I surprised myself with how steady my fingers felt. I didn't defend, I didn't explain, I didn't ask to come anyway. Instead, I walked to the cedar hutch in the corner of the dining room and opened the second drawer. Inside was a worn leather notebook, edges curled, pages stained from old cranberry sauce. I opened it to the bookmarked page. Final Christmas at the Cabin draft menu. I had already been planning it quietly. This was going to be my last year hosting anyway. The cabin was too much to keep up alone. The heating bills, the roof repairs, the long winters. But if this was how it ended if I wasn't welcome, then I would still make something of it. Just not for them. I stood by the window watching snow begin to drift down through the bare trees and whispered half to myself, half to the past. Then this year. I'll make Christmas for someone who still wants it. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed with the quilt pulled to my chin, listening to the groan of the old radiator and the whisper of wind against the window panes. Thomas used to call it the lullaby of December, this blend of metal and wind and snow. Around 3 in the morning, I got up, patted downstairs in wool socks, and lit the stove. The kitchen felt different now. Not empty exactly. More like a stage after the curtain had fallen. I set the kettle on and opened the notebook again. Over the past few weeks, I'd been drafting menus. Nothing extravagant. Just something meaningful. I called the section Final Christmas at the Cabin. At first, I thought maybe I'd invite neighbors or some friends from the library, or even just make a meal for myself and set an extra place for Thomas. But the longer I sat there sipping tea in the low light, the more certain I became. Sheila Dawson. I reached for my phone. Sheila and I had worked together on a few local community projects, mostly Thanksgiving meal deliveries and coat drives. She was the director of Maplewood House, a small independent living facility a few towns over. Not fancy, not sad either, just modest and forgotten, like a place meant to hold what the world no longer made room for. She picked up after 2 rings, her voice thick with sleep. "Marie, is everything okay? I know it's last minute," I said. But if there are any residents who won't have family visiting for Christmas, I'd like to invite them here. I'll cook. I'll handle everything." There was a long pause, then the rustling of sheets. "You serious? As serious as I've ever been." Sheila's voice softened. 12, maybe 14. That's how many usually get left behind. "You'd really do this? I'm not hosting family this year," I said simply. "But I still have a table. I still have a fire. Seems wrong to let it go cold." Another pause. "You know they still talk about the cinnamon rolls you brought on Veterans Day." One man cried. I smiled. Then he's getting his own pan this time. We agreed on the date Christmas Eve, and I promised to follow up in a few days with details. After we hung up, I sat for a long time in the quiet. The kind of quiet that didn't ache. The next morning, I pulled out the green linen box from the hall closet, the one marked Decorations Keep. Inside were my favorites. The wooden angel Thomas carved the year we married. A collection of velvet ribbon. Brass candle holders from my mother back when she still sent gifts. I ran my fingers over the angel's face. The paint was chipped now, but the expression still gentle. I said it aloud, though no one was there to hear. "We'll do it differently this year." I made a list. Meals, table settings, coat sizes, how to make space for walkers between the chairs. I checked the radiator in the guest rooms. I moved the furniture in the dining room to accommodate a longer table. I rearranged the pantry and cleared a shelf in the fridge. Every step brought something back into the house I hadn't realized had gone missing. I didn't tell anyone in the family. They'd made it clear I wasn't needed, so I gave myself to those who still were. By the end of that week, I'd stripped the beds in the guest rooms, set up a folding cot in the study, and scheduled a chimney sweep. The house smelled of orange peels, simmering in cloves, and old wood polish. The snow outside had settled into its mid-December crust, the kind that held footprints just long enough to remind you someone had passed through. On Thursday afternoon, while I was pressing napkins and setting aside extra gloves for guests who might come unprepared, my phone buzzed on the counter. I glanced at the screen. Diane Callahan. I let it go to voicemail. Then, out of instinct or maybe muscle memory, I opened the family group chat. There were 2 new messages from Lindsay Callahan. "Hey, what does everyone think about catering the ovens acting up? Connor's not thrilled about having the whole family in the condo, but we'll make it work." No one replied. That night, the phone rang again. I picked it up before I could talk myself out of it. Mom didn't bother with pleasantries. "Marie, you're not mad, are you? You've been so quiet." "I'm fine," I said. "You know how overwhelming you can make things. We just thought it was time for something simpler." "I understand, Mom." There was a pause. "You sure you're not upset? I've made other plans." I could hear her blink, could feel the weight of her trying to read what I wasn't saying. "Well, Lindsay's doing her best. It's just a small place, and Connor likes peace. He doesn't like chaos." "Of course," I said. "Then I'm sure you'll all have a peaceful time." She paused again, unsure whether to press or retreat. "All right then. Talk soon." We didn't. 2 days later, I got a call from Jenna Dawson, Sheila's niece and a journalism student at the state college. She'd heard about the Christmas dinner from her aunt and wanted to write a human interest piece for the community paper. At first, I hesitated. My instinct is always to keep things quiet, but Jenna promised the story would focus on the residents, not me. "People forget them," she said. "Your dinner's giving them something to look forward to." Her voice reminded me of a younger Lindsay before the world wore down her softness. I agreed. On Monday, Jenna arrived with a scarf tied around her hair and a camera slung over one shoulder. She wandered the kitchen and living room, taking photos of the long farmhouse table I'd borrowed from Sheila's basement and the dried orange slices I'd hung from the windows with ribbon. She was particularly struck by the memory tree, the idea I'd pulled from one of Thomas's old journals. Each guest would hang an ornament in honor of someone they missed. "It's beautiful," she said, her eyes misting. "It's like grief and hope holding hands." I didn't say much. I just nodded and kept zesting oranges. That evening, after she left, I checked the family thread again. Marie Lindsay had written, "Are you ignoring us? Mom said you're being dramatic. I need a head count for catering. And Connor wants to know if anyone has dairy issues." I closed the app. There was a time I would have scrambled to help. would have typed up 3 menu options, offered to cook something anyway, or at least gently guided my sister through her first hosting attempt. But that time had passed. Outside, the porch lights glowed against the snow. Inside, my hands smelled of rosemary and flour. I pressed another batch of sugar cookie dough into stars and trees, then labeled each container with a guest's name and a smiley face sticker I found in the back of a drawer. By morning, the article was live online. 1 table, 12 guests, and a cabin full of memory. It made the front page of the local section. I didn't send the link to anyone, but I knew they'd see it. By the end of the second week, my hands were dry from flour, my back ached from rearranging furniture, and my kitchen table was covered in a sea of name tags and cloth napkins. But for the first time in years, the ache wasn't hollow. It had weight, purpose, warmth. The memory tree stood in the corner of the living room just beside the bay window where Thomas used to sip coffee and watch the snow fall. This year, I'd strung it with twine and tiny paper ornaments, each blank, for now ready to be filled in by the guests. Sheila had sent me a list of names and short bios handwritten in her careful upright script. Howard, 82, former postman. Lost his wife 6 Christmases ago. No children. Marlene, 91, avid knitter. Used to sing in her church choir. No surviving relatives. Mr. Katz, 78, Wayutue historian. Estranged from his only daughter. 12 in total, each carrying more years than most people bother to count. I took out a fresh pen and began writing their names on cardstock. 1 per plate. The tree wasn't for decoration. It was a place for what didn't get spoken aloud anymore. Each guest would hang a name, a prayer, a wish, a memory. It was grief, yes, but stitched through with something softer. Hope, maybe. Or dignity. Outside the porch, railings glittered with snow-dusted garlands. I'd wrapped them in warm lights that flickered just enough to feel alive. Inside, the dining room held 3 mismatched tables pushed together and covered with an old ivory cloth that had belonged to my grandmother. I'd sewn the edges after Thanksgiving, patching tiny tears like a quilter fixing time. The day before Christmas Eve, I baked in shifts. Dinner rolls, pecan pie, roasted sweet potatoes. I slow-cooked a cider blend with cloves and orange peel. Every few hours I stepped outside to cool my face, take in the scent of pine and chimney smoke. Mid-afternoon, a knock at the door startled me. It was Jenna again, scarf tied tighter this time, cheeks flushed from the cold. "Sorry to drop in," she said, holding up a small wrapped package. "Just wanted to give you this." I invited her in. She handed me a book, The Gift of Years, by Joan Chittister. Inside was a note, for the woman who remembers what the rest of the world forgot. J. I didn't trust my voice enough to speak, so I just nodded. She took a few more photos, then lingered by the memory tree. "It doesn't feel like charity in here," she said. "It feels like belonging." Later, after she left, I stood alone in the quiet and adjusted the chair placements once more, making sure no one would feel isolated. I tested the path between rooms for anyone using a walker. I set aside slippers in different sizes and folded throw blankets on each guest bed. That night, I found Thomas's old cufflinks in a drawer, silver snowflakes he wore every year for the Christmas toast. I set them by the mirror in the guest bath, unsure why. Just needing them closed, maybe. The cabin no longer felt like it was waiting for something. It felt like it was preparing. I woke on Christmas Eve before the sun lit every candle in the house and placed a bundle of cedar and lavender on the hearth. Then I opened the fridge, rolled up my sleeves, and got back to work. It was nearly 5 o'clock when the knock came. I was in the kitchen tying a ribbon around the cider ladle when the sound pulled me still. I knew it wasn't one of the residents. They weren't due until 6, and Sheila always called first. I walked to the front door and peeked through the side window. It was Diane, my mother. Frank, my father, stood just behind her, his wool coat dusted with snow, and off to the side, arms crossed and shoulders hunched, was Lindsay. They hadn't called, hadn't texted, hadn't warned. I opened the door but didn't step back. Diane offered a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "We were in the area," she said. I said nothing. She glanced past me into the glowing warmth of the house, the fireplace lit candles flickering the long table already set. She spotted the memory tree and blinked too fast. "It's beautiful," she whispered. Frank cleared his throat. "We saw the article. That story what you're doing here." "It's something." Lindsay spoke last. "We didn't know it would mean this much to you." I looked at her then. She wasn't being cruel. She was just young in ways that had nothing to do with age. I let my hand rest on the doorframe. "You didn't have to know. You just had to not take it away." Silence stretched thick and cold. Diane stepped forward slightly. "We thought you needed rest, that you were pushing too hard again. Every year you make such a production out of things we thought that I should be quiet, I finished. Less. So you could have peace." My voice didn't rise. I wasn't angry. I was just tired of trimming myself down to fit. Frank shifted awkwardly. "Lindsay's party didn't go quite as planned." "No," I said. I imagine it didn't. The wind stirred behind them. Snowflakes caught in Diane's scarf. She looked suddenly older. "You've made something special here, Marie. Something real." I nodded once. "Yes, I have." From the kitchen, a timer chimed softly. Behind me, the scent of roasted squash filled the air, and the memory tree shimmered with names and blank ornaments waiting to be filled. "I should get back," I said. Diane looked down. "Of course, we won't stay." I hesitated, then opened the door a little wider. Not as an invitation, but as a courtesy. They stood there a moment longer, unsure. Then Lindsay reached into her coat pocket and handed me a small envelope. "From Connor," she said. He read the article, too. He wanted to donate something. Or help if you need volunteers. I took it and gave a small nod. "Thank you." No hugs. No big gestures. But as they turned to leave, I saw Diane reach out and touch the porch railing just lightly, as if trying to remember something she'd once loved and forgotten how to hold. The guests began arriving just after 6. One by one, they stepped in from the cold cheeks, flushed eyes wide, some walking slowly with canes or arms looped through volunteers. I greeted each by name, handed them cider, helped hang coats. Laughter rose quickly, tentative at first, then full. The dining room glowed. The memory tree had begun to fill paper ornaments, swinging gently from its branches, names, handwritten messages, a few small photographs clipped to twine. Some guests stood by it longer than others, fingers trembling as they tied a ribbon or smoothed a note against a branch. I was refilling water pitchers when Sheila tapped me on the shoulder. "Come outside for a second," she said softly. I followed her to the porch where Howard, one of our oldest guests, stood bundled in a navy pea coat. His hands were clasped, and next to him stood a young woman no more than 25 with dark hair and tear-bright eyes. "This is my granddaughter," he said, voice low. We hadn't spoken in over a decade. Sheila leaned in. She read the article. The young woman stepped forward. "I didn't even know he was still in Vermont." "I searched your name, saw the story. And I just drove." Howard blinked quickly, then looked at me. I didn't think I'd ever see her again. For a moment, none of us spoke. There was only the soft hush of falling snow and the golden warmth pouring from the windows behind us. Then Diane's voice floated from the doorway. "Marie." I turned. She stood there holding a mug of cider, eyes rimmed red. She'd come in quietly after all. I hadn't seen her enter. She looked at Howard and his granddaughter, then back at me. "You didn't just decorate a house," she said. "You brought people home." I nodded. There wasn't anything else to say. Diane stepped closer. "We were wrong. About this. About you." I didn't answer right away. Instead, I walked to the memory tree, picked up the ornament I'd kept in my apron pocket all evening when I hadn't dared to hang. Thomas Callahan, 1949-2012. I tied it to the lowest branch just above the small string of wooden bells he'd carved our third Christmas together. Then I turned back to her. "Would you like to stay?" Diane nodded, pressing her hand to her mouth. That night she helped me serve the pie. Morning came softly, the kind of hush only fresh snow can make. The guests had gone, some back to Maplewood with full bellies and wrapped leftovers, others driven home by volunteers. All except Howard, who stayed behind to have coffee with his granddaughter. I didn't ask how long she planned to stay. It didn't feel like my place. It felt like grace. I stood in the dining room, mug in hand, watching the embers settle in the hearth. The memory tree twinkled quietly, now full. Some ornaments tilted, others hung just so. I let my fingers trail the edge of one Betty, 1963. I miss your laugh. Behind me, the soft rattle of dishes. Lindsay had risen early and was setting the table with quiet precision, nothing fancy, just folded napkins and warmed bread. Frank read from a paper scrap someone had left by the tree, a poem about finding family in unlikely places. Diane poured coffee. Her movements were slow but certain, the same way I remembered from winters when she still wore aprons and called us in from sledding. We ate together, no speeches, no tension. Just the scrape of forks, the crackle of fire, the scent of maple sausage and rosemary. Before they left, Diane touched my shoulder. Next year, she said, if you're up for it, we'd like to come again. I nodded. This house may not be mine much longer. Then maybe, she said, it can be all of ours. Just once more. As they stepped outside, I walked back to the tree. Snow fell past the window in slow, drifting flakes, and I thought of Thomas, of his steady hands, his quiet pride in making things that lasted. Some traditions I